Aquarian Music Witch, the podcast.
And I also just kind of cut into whatever part of the conversation feels right. So if we want to just like shoot the shit for 20 minutes and that's easier to get into it, that's fine. But
sure. I don't know if you like usually start this shit with like a question or like.
Well, I mean,
some kind of intro, like
that. It depends totally on the episode. So I do think one good place to start would just be about, because the podcast is kind of about spirituality. So
sure.
What is your relationship to your spirituality, to your religion, and what that has to do with all of this?
I mean, I was raised, I guess, like hardcore atheist, if you will. Like my mom's side of the family rather is so like anti-religion that they're like so liberal they've wrapped around to conservative again in their liberalism, which I find like kind of comical. And it took a long time for me to like find spirituality and then find religion kind of through that. You know, I was raised away from religion or away from my Jewish roots after my dad died, and so I didn't have like access to any of it. So like, you know, the whole notion of like, oh, all Jews are indoctrinated into loving Israel because yada yada, like that's just like what you learn in synagogue. Like, yeah, that's totally true for some. It just isn't true for me. And it's just like kind of funny that I don't know, wound up where I've wound up, but like I don't think that I really connected to the religious aspects of my Judaism until I guess probably 4 or 5 years ago, maybe a little longer. But like I'm almost 35, so like I was at least close to 30 when I started like practicing more than Hanukkah, you know, like, and so yeah, I mean, to me, religion and spirituality are one and the same as far as I'm concerned. Because to me, you know, God is Mother Nature. So, like, call it spiritual, call it religion, call it whatever the fuck you want. That's my God. My God rules the trees. You know. So, that's...
Rules the trees. And then you also have this educational background.
Yeah, so I was a double major in college with like history, Middle East history, and sociology. And I was a Middle East studies major until I think halfway through my college career, because I just for the life of me could not learn Arabic at the time, and I really wanted to learn at the time in my life, I really wanted to learn Arabic, and I still don't know Arabic or Hebrew, but I really, you know, everybody's always like, well, why do you want to learn Arabic versus Hebrew? And I'm like, I don't know. I just did. And so I tried for like a year and a half, like 3 semesters, and it just like kicked my ass. And I mean, it did not help that I was like doing way too much and like trying to do way too many very difficult things for me to do at the same time. I think if I were to try and do it now, I would be successful. But, you know, my school required either Arabic or Hebrew in order to do a Middle East studies major. So when I gave up on Arabic, I was like, well, that goes. So then I switched to history as opposed to Middle East studies. And then wound up as like a history major with a concentration in the Middle East, as opposed to like a Middle East studies major.
Okay.
But like it's 601, so like I did the same number of fucking history classes of Middle East history as I would have done if I did a Middle East studies major. And then I wound up double majoring in sociology because I just really enjoyed Soc and found it fascinating and was like really good at understanding the theories of all of it. So it's like, I've joked for I've been graduated college since 2012, and it has been the most useless double major for me that I could possibly imagine.
Well,
I fucking build furniture and I walked dogs for 7 years. It is, other than waiting one table when I was 22 and some snide old white dude very condescendingly asked me, "What are your thoughts on Palestine, Israel?" 10 years ago. And I was just like, "Well," and he was like, and I was like, "Yeah, so I was actually I do this." Yeah. And he was like, And he was expecting me to be really stupid because I was waiting tables.
Yeah.
And so that was the only time that my major was even remotely useful until October 8th.
Well, do you think that it helped you understand anything about yourself or your own kind of where you came from?
Yes and no. More no than yes. Just in the context of I was raised away from my Jewishness, so it didn't. I was raised really atheist, and I was disconnected from my Jewish side of the family for so long that it didn't really I never felt like I fit. The only times that my Jewishness was ever referenced among my family growing up were one time we were having Thanksgiving dinner in Canada. For God knows what reason, we decided to go to Canada for the day, and I was raised in Vermont, so it was not that far. But anyway, so we went to Canada, and we're sitting there around this restaurant table, and someone made some kind of joke about Jews. I don't even remember what the joke was because I was 12. And someone made a Jew joke, and my Uncle Tom, who's not even actually related to me, but that say-so uncle that everybody has, and he was like, "Ixnay on the UJ," and that was the only time that my Jewishness has ever been referenced. We went to fucking Hanukkah dinner with the only other Jewish family in my town once a year. And we had brisket, and it was great. But that was it. I played some dreidel. We had those weird chocolate coins that taste like a foot. But that was, they're so gross. But that was it. I didn't even know what Manischewitz was until I was 25. So it just, when I graduated.
Pause. I don't know what Manischewitz is.
Manischewitz is just a really gross wine.
Okay.
That Jews have.
Okay.
And drink
gross wine.
Self-flagellation. It's so sweet. It's supposed to be a port wine.
Okay.
I think
that's very sweet then.
But
yeah.
It is just. It's just.
Does it taste syrupy?
Yeah, it's syrupy and sweet, and it's got a little bit of bitter, and you're just none of this is good. None of it's good, and. The first Hanukkah dinner that I hosted at my house a few years ago, my friend brought a bottle of Manischewitz, and I was like, "Thank you so much," and I put it on a shelf and left it there for 5 years. I was just no, I'm not drinking this. I'm not doing this to myself. It's not happening. This is a happy celebration.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
It's that and gefilte fish. Why? Why do we do this? We live in a different time. We're not in the desert anymore. We don't need to pickle everything. It's gonna be okay. Whatever. But yeah.
All right.
So we have a lot of weird food. Some of it's really good. Latkes, phenomenal.
Latkes are good.
Yeah. Other stuff.
So, then 10 years ago, what were your thoughts on Palestine?
Well. I mean, there's been so much happening, and my thoughts on the Palestinian state as it would like to exist. That's not the right phrasing that I'm looking for, but I still believe I have believed since I was 16 and found out about this conflict. I believed then that Palestinians deserve to exist and deserve to have a place in the world and, deserve to have their own entity if they want it. But do I think that, Israel should go? Not so much. No, not at all. Like, I think that Israelis have just as much right to exist on this planet, and Jews have just as much right to exist on this planet as Palestinians do. But, like, I don't think, for example, that Gaza should be, fucking paved over and named Nova. Like, I don't think that's right. But, and that's kind of where my stance on Palestine, Israel, that's like what being pro-Palestine used to mean. Like I've been pro-Palestine forever in the context of what many other Jews view as pro-Palestine, being like, no, like, y'all have the right to exist on this planet. I don't personally know a single Jew who doesn't think that Palestinians deserve to exist. I know they exist, but I don't know any. And for me, that's what pro-Palestine always meant. So, like, it's been really weird and interesting in a really dark way.
Really painful way, it sounds like.
Yeah.
In your experience.
Yeah, I mean, the last 5 months have been excruciating. But looking at, like I was talking to my partner about this in one of the very brief conversations that we've had about it. She was like, well, when we started dating, you were pro-Palestine. And I was like, yeah, I'm still pro-Palestine, but not in the context of the madness that's happening now. Like, that's not what this was supposed to be. Like, and I know that doesn't mean anything, because what is anything supposed to be at any given time in history and whatever, but, like, that's not what I meant when I said I was pro-Palestine, and that's not what I'll ever mean when I say that I'm pro-Palestine. And it's gotten to the point, like, it's gone so far off the deep end into, like, a realm of just utter chaos and psychosis that I am hesitant to even say that I'm pro-Palestine now, because I don't want to be associated with whatever the fuck that mess is. Like, but I am.
Well, can we unpack that more? Because I think, like, terminology really matters.
Absolutely.
And I think there's a lot of times where things, like, two different people will be using the same phrase in two very different ways. Mm-hmm. And the only way through that is to really unpack the differences or the similarities and what you actually mean.
Sure.
And you had sent me this really fantastic podcast, Unapologetic, the Third Narrative, that I have been enjoying. I'm, like, not through it yet, but I got up to, like, episode 8 or whatever.
I'm genuinely amazed, because the day that I sent it to you, I was on episode 3. I had been listening to it for 24 hours. Maybe I was on episode 4. And I'd been listening to it for, like, maybe 36 hours. And I've been, like, following them on Instagram for a hot minute now, but, like, I just haven't had time to, like, go into the podcast. And, like, I started listening to it, and it was so just mentally intensive that I was just like, okay, like, I need to come back to this at a time where I can actually take any of it in.
I had to re-listen to certain parts of the episodes and things to catch, to really absorb it.
Because it's a lot.
It's packed full of information.
Yeah, like, they take nothing lightly, which I have the utmost respect for, and I think it's, like, one of those things that you can only really do when you live it like that.
Yeah, well, they're speaking from experience, and that's what it's such a relief to, like, latch onto a little bit of that, because there's so many people. I think the thing that is really so painful for me is watching the reductivism of the Western take on Free Palestine and the anti-Semitism that is so disturbingly jumping out once people have the excuse for it.
Yeah.
Which should be totally separable from a question of what we think about Israel, but...
Wouldn't that be nice?
Wouldn't that be nice?
And, like, the irony of that is just, like, a little too much for me. Like, the irony of it in the context of separating the peoplehood from the state, separating the people from their leader, being completely conflated by the left. I'm like, are you guys okay? Like, have you been gargling with bong water? Like, I genuinely don't understand. And I do understand, because the arrogance within the left has gone unchecked for far too long, in my opinion. And I have been a staunch leftist for as long as I have been cognitive of anything. Like, I was raised on the left. I was raised by someone who... Oh. Okay, Ted. Super helpful, buddy. Sorry about my cat.
Unnecessary intrusion.
He wanted a seat at the table.
Yeah, but there were things on that seat.
He didn't realize that it wasn't connected, okay? He just wanted a seat at the table. It's a very, anti-Semitism is important to him. So I just, I don't know. I've been with the left and supportive of the left forever, and I want to vomit every time I look at the left now, and I'm just embarrassed. I'm embarrassed. It's the best way I'm fucking embarrassed. And I am embarrassed of them, and I'm embarrassed of myself because I contributed to this. Willingly, enthusiastically, I contributed to this. And the amount of, it's not even guilt that I feel, because I've been vocal about my issues with the left for a while now, at least 5 years. But I haven't fought that hard against it. I really haven't. I haven't, checked any of my friends who were getting aggressively arrogant. I haven't even fucking checked myself. Well,
yeah, can you maybe list out some of the things that you see as problems?
Sure. So, I'm gonna, speak specifically to my experience in
That's all you
Philadelphia, my experience in college, my experience that, because that's been my life for the last 15 years, was college, and then moving back to Philly and living here. And, in college, I was so angry because I was in college, and, I graduated in 2012, and I was the only one who was very obviously, I was one of 2 trans people on campus, and I was the only one who was very obviously non-binary. And I was the first one who came out as genderqueer when I learned what genderqueer was, because it had been coined a year before. So it was all very new, and I was fucking mad. I learned about the injustices all over the place, and I was fucking mad. And my Jewishness wasn't even a fucking blip on my radar at the time. I, like many, many, many others in the United States of my generation and younger, did not believe that Jews were a minority, that we needed protection, it was post-World War II, we were fine, living in the United States. What the fuck was gonna go wrong? We were fine. We made it. We're good. It was the fucking Irish who came. Y'all are good, but we're clearly not. So that was a big fucking clock upside the head for me, and I know many others, but, back in college, I was pissed because I was oppressed and no one cared, and I was hated and no one cared, and I didn't have rights, and
you mean in terms of your queerness or your transness?
My queerness, my transness, I didn't have housing rights, I didn't have job rights. I got fired from multiple jobs when they found out I was gay. I had to, every time I applied for a job, I was always telling them, by the way, I'm gay, in case that's a problem, because I don't pass. I look very gay. And so, for me, it wasn't an option to be well, hopefully I don't find out. Yeah. That wasn't a thing, because I'm, I was fucking shaved head. I looked like an ex-military person at the time. There was no hiding that shit. And so, and I remember when I cut my hair my sophomore year, my cousin cut my hair for me. And I went to school at Dickinson in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, which is a half hour outside Harrisburg. It is not a progressive area. It is Pennsyltucky. It is the Bible Belt. And I remember when I cut my hair, my cousin, before she took the scissors to it, was is this going to be safe for you? And I was guess we'll find out. Like, and that was the conversation. Like, and so I was fucking angry all through college. And so, like, other people's needs didn't matter to me. Like, people who had more privilege, their needs didn't matter to me. I did not care at all. Like, I could not have cared less. I cared about the black students on my campus. I cared about other racial minorities on my campus, and they fucking got their shit, you know, because it was a really bigoted time in a really bigoted place at a really bigoted school. I cared about women's needs, but I will tell you, I could not have cared less about the needs of white men. They could burn for all I cared. I didn't care.
I understand the feeling in your heart when you're at that place.
Yeah. And it's, you know, like, and I've been talking for a couple of years now about how, like, every person, and my cousin told me this when I first came out. She was like, there will come a time where you are going to be so angry and you are going to hate straight people. You're gonna hate them. There's just gonna be a time where you hate them. And I was like, that's crazy. I could never. Like, my best friends are straight. Mm-hmm. She was like, yeah, I know. But there's gonna come a time where you're gonna hate them, and you need to know that that's okay. That's okay. And she's, like, in her 40s now. Like, she's 10 years older than me. Mm-hmm. And she came out a long time before me. And God, I am so grateful that I had her, because she just validated me without me needing her to validate me, but she gave me the space to be where I needed to be when I needed to be it. It was amazing. But she warned me, you're going to hate them, because eventually you're going to look around and you're going to start seeing the things that are there, that have always been there, but that you've never noticed because it has never affected you. Mm-hmm. So you're going to watch a movie and you're not going to be in it ever. You're not going to be there. And that's going to make you mad. And you're going to read a book and you're not going to be there. Mm-hmm. It's going to make you mad. And you're going to start resenting the straight people who are represented around you. And it's okay to be angry. And that was probably the most helpful advice that I have ever gotten in my life, because it has influenced how I've been watching the queer community unravel in the last 10 years. The queer community used to mean something. Like, it used to mean something. Like, when I was in college and I was attacked multiple times, and when I warned my friends that there were people attacking the visibly queer, they rallied around me so hard. And, like, my friend, who was this big, beautiful, amazing femme Latino man, and he was just big, and he had the biggest heart, and he texted me back, and he was like, bitch, tell me where you are right now. I'm coming with my fucking stilettos. And I was like, I love you. Like, I just love you. And that was the queer community. Like, there were obviously issues, because there's always issues, but at the end of the day, we were with each other. And now we are just waiting to tear each other down. Mm-hmm. And it's so sad. Like, it's just so sad. This one-upsman game that everyone's got going of, oh, well, how dare you tell me, I'm picking a demographic out of the air right now, but I don't know, Arab, non-binary person how to feel. I'm not. But I'm also not gonna, like, let you get away with bullshit just because of your skin color, because isn't that racist? No. I'm gonna just let shit slide because I feel bad that you're racially oppressed, because you're being an asshole right now. Do I not get to call you out on shitty behavior? You know, like, do we not call the police on someone who's very obviously endangering a child because they're Black.
That's a whole discussion.
I mean, it's a whole other thing, but like it's relevant and it's relevant to this conversation of the queer community, which has really spearheaded what has been happening over the last 10 years. Like I'm saying this with the intent of going back to 10 years ago when I believe cancel culture really started. Because I remember when Jane the Virgin came out, I was scrolling through my Facebook. This was like, I wasn't on Instagram at the time because I didn't even know what it was. I don't think it existed. I don't actually know when Instagram came out. But people were still active on Facebook. And I'm scrolling through my Facebook, and I see this post from a friend of mine that I met at Seeds of Peace. And they were Palestinian and non-binary, and they posted this thing on Instagram or on Facebook about how grateful they were that Jane the Virgin existed because they grew up watching Gilmore Girls, and they posted that they couldn't believe how they had ever connected to Gilmore Girls because there was so much privilege in that show. And how could they have connected with something with so much privilege? And they started like kind of going a little bit like into tearing different aspects of Gilmore Girls down for being like abundant and privilege and whatever. And I just commented because this was at the height of like old TV shows just being denigrated, just fucking decimated because they were, overly privileged and they didn't represent people appropriately and they were hateful towards certain demographics and whatnot. And I felt like all of that was valid criticism at the time. And then they started to go after Gilmore Girls, which was like my all-time favorite show because I had a very hard life with my family, and that was like the only thing that depicted a child of a parent going out on their own and cutting their family off. It was the only representation that I had for what I had chosen to do in my life. And I was so upset at the very idea
that it would be canceled
of someone canceling this show that had done so much for me. And I was just like, I literally commented back to them and I was like, no, can we not take out Gilmore Girls? Like, I can't lose another show. And they replied, do you realize that you just told a non-binary Palestinian person not to feel something about a show? And you don't see the problem with that. And I was like, first of all, I thought I was talking to a friend. Apparently not, because you only respond to people like that who you don't know and don't care about. Because what the fuck was
or
that?
If you're just very triggered.
I mean,
but then it's like
you give no space for conversation when you respond with something like that. There is no room.
Well, yeah, because I don't think that everybody engages in discussion the same way as like you or I might, perhaps because of a specific kind of like neurodivergence. But
yes.
I think a lot of people in rhetorical space are like vying for power, actually. Yeah. And that's what that whole thing is about. And like, right. I'm a little bit sitting here trying to be like, well, the conversation about if it's racism or not is like not the same conversation even. Like, that's a distracting kind of thing where everybody can be like, haha, dog whistle or whatever. Like, that's not even the conversation. The conversation is somebody trying to strong arm you into shutting up, and now that's a tool. And I've experienced this. And then, like, you can, take that macrocosmic, like, thing, the point system or whatever. And then, but what's really happening is, like, triggeredness and nihilism and hopelessness. Just, like, people just being like, I think I will never get above this level, and I also don't think it makes me so angry that you are at some other place, and so I just want you to die. Yeah. And I think that's where that just like rage comes out, and it gets misdirected, obviously, but like...
Sure. And I had literally a repeat of that conversation, almost verbatim. I mean, it wasn't about TV, it was about Palestine and Israel. It happened to me yesterday, where I was like, okay, but like, here's the situation. Like, this is this is what's going on. And like what we were specifically talking about was, I was like, okay, but like, you are a Westerner ascribing an idea of race relations and racism by calling Israel a white colonialist state. You are ascribing Western ideas of racism and race relations and racial power and equity to a space where it doesn't belong.
That part I agree, and that's what I'm talking about with reductivism.
Right, because that's just not what's happening. So like, let's unpack that, because that's not what's going on, and you can't do that, because that doesn't actually suit you. Like, it doesn't suit your argument. It suits your argument for idiots who don't look much beyond it, but it actually doesn't benefit your argument at all. Like, it actually completely deflates your argument, because the reality is much more intense than that. Like, the reality is much more grotesque and much more intense and much more violent than white colonialist state not being held accountable. Like, come on. Yeah. Look deeper.
Aquarian Music Witch, the podcast, is made possible by listeners like you. To support this project, you can contribute directly through our Ko-fi page at ko-fi.com/aquarianmusicwitch, or consider subscribing to our Supercast page. With the AMW Supercast Content Access Pass, you'll gain access to a vault of exclusive content and other cosmic perks starting at just $5 a month. Now, back to the show.
I have also been a leftist for a long time, and I still pretty much identify with that if we're talking about the scholarship. If we're talking about the things about critical theory that I believe in, I don't unbelieve in them.
I mean, it's irresponsible for all of the people you're trying to advocate for. You know, it's, if you want to advocate for the Israeli government doing more to protect Palestinians, fucking advocate for that. You should.
People don't even know what they're advocating. Like, they're advocating for cancel all Jewish people as an extension of Israel, as an extension of white supremacy, which is reductive. It's just not, and it's harmful, and it's colonizing.
Yesterday was like, it's incredible to me that you're going to tell me as a Black indigenous person that I am ascribing whiteness or white supremacy, or I'm upholding white supremacy in another part of the world, when you obviously benefit from more white privilege than I do. It's just crazy. And I was like, okay, but like, again, that's not the conversation. You are now taking it way out of context, right? So like, we were talking about Israel-Palestine, and now we're talking about race relations in the United States. At what point did I, as a Jewish native person, tell you that I don't have more privilege than you? I pass. Sure. I'm not saying that I don't benefit from white privilege.
Privilege just becomes like a thing to judge, which is not productive.
And I was like, if you want to go tit for tat on this whole who benefits more from what fucking demographic we belong to, we can fucking do that. But it is pointless, because quantifying oppression does nothing. It only hurts your argument. When you try and quantify how much you are oppressed versus someone else, and that gives you more power in that conversation because you've had it worse, fuck off. Fuck off. Because I can promise you, and I have had a fucking rough go of it.
Of course.
And there are not many people who have had a worse go in the context of being assaulted for what I look like, being told I should die for what I believe in, being told that being curb stomped because I wore a suit. Like, fuck you. Like, I've been poor, I've been broke, I've been broken, I've been attacked, I've been hated, I've been hate crimed. Like, no. Like, you're not going to sit there and tell me that we're going to go tit for tat and quantify oppression. Like, fine, you want to play this game? Let's do it. Like, but you're not, it's not going to do you any good.
No. And it's not even, it's, all of that is valid. And it's not even, related to, like, to me it's about the who's actually had the personal experience related to the conversation. And it's weird because this equation of BLM to this issue is also doing this thing where it's like displacing who has the authority to speak on it. And so suddenly I am not behind, like, I just can't see how, when you don't know any Jewish people and you don't know any Palestinian people,
yeah,
why are you trying to add your voice, and why are you trying to speak over anybody that has any personal experience related to it?
Ironic part for me, where it's like, throughout all of Black Lives Matter, the whole thing was don't talk over Black people sharing their experience. Shut up. Listen. Happily. I am more than happy.
And I remain behind that entire movement, actually.
Like,
yeah.
That mentality is vital.
Mm-hmm.
Like, to actually have, like, active times where you listen and you learn and you absorb and you take it in no matter how uncomfortable. I'm still fucking doing that. As whatever I am, as a Jew, I have heard out my Palestinian friends who have told me, what you're saying is hurting me. And, like, I've had a couple of my Palestinian friends be fucking mean as shit about it. And I clock myself and I go, okay, I am also in a lot of pain, but I am going to make space for you and your pain because it is still valid, and I am sorry that I'm hurting you. And I'm going to give you that space. And then when the meanness continues to come in, I had to stop one of my friends and be like, look, I love you, and I know that you are angry and you are in pain, but I am still your friend. And you talking to me like this is not going to help that. I get that you're angry. I really do. And I'm sorry that I contributed to that for you. But what you're doing right now, the way that you're talking to me, is not going to work. It doesn't work for me. I will not accept it. And this was like on the tailcoats of me posting mostly about anti-Semitism that's happening in the US. And he was fucking pissed. And I was like, yeah, I get it. It seems innocuous to you. While your people are dying horrifically, it seems selfish to you for me to post about that. And I can understand that. I can see that. And I have space for that. But at the same time, I am not going to allow myself to be erased, myself to be killed, because you're in pain. That's not going to happen. And I think that like, more broadly speaks to what is happening in Palestine, Israel right now. Because, like, Israelis at the end of the day are just fucking trying not to die.
Well, kind of,
like, yeah. That's the crux of it. There's tons of arguments floating around the internet and I mean, even in the International Court of Justice and the ICJ, like, there's fucking South Africa taking Israel to court for genocide. Okay. Sure. Are there some in the Israeli government that are genuine pieces of shit? 100%. Yeah. Are there some in the United States government that are genuine pieces of shit?
Yeah. Well,
I mean, have we seen Mike Pence? Like,
yeah.
I'm sorry. Like,
yeah,
absolutely. And, like, are there some who have genocidal intent? I would be willing to argue yes. I think that genocidal intent by some, sure, yeah. Is the state itself responsible? No. Like, should individual? But here's the thing, because, like, okay, I'm gonna calm down a second. But in the history of the world, the way that the world exists, the way that we know it, having the ICJ exist, having countries exist, having the UN exist, having definitive borders and whatever the fuck. Whether you agree with borders or you don't agree with borders, it doesn't fucking matter because they exist, right? In that entire time, Israel is the first country to be taken before the ICJ on accusations of genocide. Germany was not taken as a country before the ICJ. Germany!
Well, I think more people have eyes on this, for one thing, and we don't have to agree 100% on everything. I think it's a terrible thing that so many people are dying, and that's a big reason why. I mean, not that you disagree that it's a terrible thing that people are dying, but I think that it's a humanitarian crisis, and so it's kind of like, first there's fundamentally it's not okay, and that is a problem, and I don't think anybody's denying that's a problem, right?
Nobody.
Like,
I don't think there's anybody that exists on the planet.
So
that's a problem.
Yeah. So I just feel like that's an important thing to lay on the ground and like understand that then you have to think like, what do you do about it? Because a lot of the people jumping in and saying that this is, and I would take the language of saying something that I would say it's a genocide. But let's unpack that instead of just being like, because what do you mean? You know.
Well, so when you look at words like genocide, they have a legal requirement of meeting a certain standard. It's terrible phrasing because like you have to kill so many people with intent.
But I think it's more about the Palestinian identity too, right? Like
I need you to say more because I don't know what you mean.
It's about the context of what is a Palestinian identity even, and like.
What are you in regards to what though?
Like, is it again like the West is like reductively equating it, I think, to Indigenous Americans.
Yes,
and
it is.
That's not really what, and it's not like denying their indigeneity or their peoplehood,
right?
I think, but I'm not an expert, but well, there's something else going on there. And so, what does a genocide look like? The idea of exterminating Palestinians and what. That's a different landscape entirely than whatever's happening in America, for example.
Right.
Or what happened when people rounded up.
My understanding of what is unfolding on the left is that they believe that Israel's committing a genocide based mostly on the number of people that have died. So there are numbers floating around of how many people have died. How many innocent civilians have died, how many combatants have died, how many children and women have died. There are numbers floating around, and I'm being intentionally vague about that because the numbers that are floating around are quoted by Hamas. And, like, personally, I have a hard time quoting a terrorist organization as a reliable source. I have a hard time quoting an entity that has genuine ulterior motives, who have literally been interviewed on multiple occasions to say that the Palestinian people are not their problem, they're the problem of the UN. What? The deaths of the people who elected you are not your problem? What the fuck are you talking about? What do you mean? That's not your problem. That's why you're not letting them in the tunnels. That's why you're not engaging in any of the ceasefires that Israel has petitioned for you, that any of the ceasefire agreements that they've sent your way, you're not accepting it because you're prepared to kill all of the Palestinian people for your cause. That's what's happening. That's fucked up. I have a problem with that. And I have a problem quoting their numbers when they come out minutes after an attack or after some horrific mistake, like one of the rockets that was sent by one of the other Palestinian factions that hit the parking lot of Al-Shifa Hospital. And Hamas, within minutes, said 500 people have died at the hands of an Israeli rocket. What?
Well, obviously there's a lot of propaganda going, and on all sides, and that is something that's gotten me in trouble to even say all sides, because I understand how that is like, I feel like you almost need to put dog whistles aside long enough to even have a fucking conversation about this. Because the issue is every single word out of my mouth, someone has said it's a dog whistle, and I'm sorry, I'm still processing all of this personally. And it seems to me like, and I said this to a friend, there is clearly a lot of propaganda on both sides. And so what that takes is media literacy and like even people listening to this, have some discernment. Do not just listen for 5 seconds and have some discernment, because that's the only way to have any beginning of a conversation about this. And there clearly is so much propaganda on both sides, and people, especially in the West, from who I've been talking to, immediately will be like, oh, both sides, you say you're a Zionist. Well, no, I'm not personally. We don't have to agree to have a conversation about it. Right. But I am not. But you can't even talk about it.
Like having some discernment, like you said, like it's absolutely vital to like actually wait, like, and look at, okay, like for example, I think, what was it? Something happened the other day. The 100 people that were killed during the aid kerfuffle. Like there were 2 aid trucks, and all of the news sources within minutes of this happening all said hundreds of people were killed by Israeli gunfire while waiting for aid. That was, I remember, because it was like 8 a.m. and I was scrolling through the news, and because I don't get my news from Instagram. Like I scroll through multiple different sources at multiple different times, and I try really hard to like be cognitive and aware of what I'm consuming, because I am also vividly aware that media outlets are fucking flawed. Mm-hmm. Like they're still run by people, and like that's a whole nother
we were just talking about framing bias, like and beyond that too, but like everything is very, very biased in this. You have to understand how to unpack that and look through it.
I'm sitting there and I'm looking at this coverage, and I was like, that doesn't make sense. Mm-hmm. It doesn't make sense. Israel is under a microscope. The world is watching Israel every minute of every day right now. Why would they do something like this that would literally hand the case to the ICJ? It would hand the case to South Africa, and Israel would be sanctioned as a country. If this is true, this is a fucking mess. Like, but I waited to share that content because I was like, something feels off. It feels off. And then within the hour, aerial footage from the IDF came out and showed what really happened, which was not Israel open firing on a group of people patiently waiting for food. Which is what the initial articles all said. And it also wasn't hundreds of people, which is what the initial article said. And to me, the biggest problem with this, with the way that everything has been covered since October 7th, is it takes seconds for people to see the preliminary coverage and make a decision. Seconds. It doesn't even matter if the same news outlets go back and correct themselves, which is quote unquote what they've been doing. It doesn't matter because everyone's already made their decision after that first article came out.
And they came to their conclusion first anyway. Right, nobody in the West knows what the hell they're talking about anyway.
Nobody has a fucking clue. And I mean, I don't have a fucking clue. I'm from the West. Like, they're like, the thing that pisses me off most about the left is this arrogance, this lack of humbleness, this lack of humility. The left has none of it because we have gone unchecked for a decade. We have gone unchecked. Everyone's so scared of getting into a fight with a friend or being canceled or whatever. There's something about people who believe so strongly in their moral superiority for being so aware, for being so woke, that it's not fucking helpful. Like, you're not helping. And, like, that's the most I can say to people on the left right now. You're not helping. You're not helping Palestinians anywhere. You're not helping them in the West. You're not helping them in the East.
Yeah.
You have no idea. You're fucking celebrating the Houthis? Are you out of your mind? Do you know what the Houthis are about? Do you know that they just fucking massacred a whole bunch of people? How do you celebrate the Houthis bombing American ships from the comfort of your couch?
I think it's trauma and nihilism and complete ignorance.
I don't think it's trauma. I resent the implication that it's trauma, because I have a lot of trauma and I make space for other people's trauma, and these people are not making space for shit.
It's not an excuse to do the wrong thing. I just think it's certainly nihilism then. Let's go with that. It's this idea that there is nothing, and I think that ties back to like what I've been really thinking about that I can speak to is about kind of like what colonization and decolonization have to do with all of this. And there's so much, obviously, and so much of that also is like the West trying to go in general and impose whatever, like democracy, whatever, onto other people without knowing what the fuck we're talking about. And that has always been exactly what colonization is. So what I'm seeing is people who think they're trying to do something toward decolonization, which is a whole interesting conversation.
Right, which is, like,
is this decolonizable? Yeah, like what is that? But instead you're actually just you've become colonizers, actually, like the leftists in the West who do nothing but scream on TikTok about how,
I mean,
like,
there's one bitch who fucking shaved her head in protest.
I don't even follow that stuff.
Like,
it's just like
it showed up on community news. Like, I follow random Jewish community outlet stuff, and like it showed this one woman shaving her head in protest with a sign about Palestinian children starving. She shaved her head, and I was like,
yeah.
What?
I had a friend who sent me
that doesn't make any sense.
I had a friend who sent me a video of a baby and who had been going to like these protests, and I had been like, okay, well, it was like right after October 7th kind of time, and they were like, I'm marching in the street, and I was like, good, like that's great, good for you. I'm glad you can kind of like get out there and be involved. And then sent me this video of like a crying baby from Palestine and was like, I just want to adopt a Palestinian baby. And I was like, do you? Like, because that sounds like you're just triggered, and not in like a way that, and when I say that, I don't mean like you're triggered so I'm writing you off and I don't want to listen to you. Like, it's interesting. I get triggered, and then I have to ask, why did I feel that way? Because where is that coming from? But like, you don't want to adopt a Palestinian baby. I'm sorry. Like, you're not wanting to inconvenience your life. You're wanting to do these kind of like maybe vanity things. It's like a performativity. Yeah. And that's certainly like in the university. That's certainly like, you know, real wokeness is like legal justice, things like that. And then it gets like reduced and also like separated or like further and further, more abstractified until it's like about identity. I get to invent words, I think, at this stage of my career. I
was like, there have been a couple. I've let the rest of them slide, but abstractified is not going to make the cut.
All right, fine. Abstracted. It's abstracted into identity politics, which was never really what the scholarship said. The scholarship is about legal rights for people that make a more even playing field and fighting those battles in like an incremental way. And then there's decolonization, the question of that. And what I had written down, like pursuant to this conversation in the podcast that you had sent me, which again is a great podcast, Unapologetic the Third Narrative. I think they were talking through things and talking about like who's native to the land or whatever.
Sure.
And I think one thing where,
and for the record, I think we both are.
Yeah, so that's an interesting entire history, right? That people don't understand.
Because there's fucking Jewish Palestinians. They exist. They're
Yeah.
probably in hiding right now, but they exist. Like, you know, and like, even if, and to me, nativity and indigeneity are different.
Mm-hmm.
Nativity indicates that you have a strong connection to the land. Indigeneity is like, my people originated here.
That's an interesting definition.
I mean, I don't know if that's like the accurate definition, but that's how I've come to understand it.
Okay.
You know, and I'm humble enough to be corrected. Like, if I'm wrong, okay, fine. But like, I'm good with that. Like, and I've had multiple people be like, well, what if you're wrong? Okay, I would love to be wrong.
Then you will take new information. Fine. That's the best way to approach it. I would
love to be wrong. Because I am comfortable with learning. Like, what is it with people? Like, everyone goes into whatever. Totally, I'm about to go off on another tangent. But, like, if you want to talk about indigeneity versus nativity, like, what's the point?
Well, like, it is
who
like...
does it benefit?
It is, because like, then it becomes a... And then I've also seen weird arguments.
An argument of who was here first, whose people stepped one foot on this land first. It doesn't fucking matter.
I think that it matters. I think that it doesn't matter. It doesn't. Okay.
You know, I mean, maybe it does. It does and it doesn't.
It does and it doesn't.
It does because, you know, if you want to talk about colonization, if you want to talk about indigeneity, if you want to talk about, you know, nativity, the definition of colonization is taking one's holy land or holy space or lived space and make it your own holy lived space. Then I'm sorry, but the Arabs are fucking colonizers. Like, it was not a fun way that the Arab expansion happened. It wasn't like they knocked on doors and were like, excuse me. Like, they're not the fucking Mormons that are knocking on my door every day being like, have you considered Jesus? Like, no, like, they didn't sit there and go, listen, Muhammad was, like, actually a really great guy. Like, that didn't happen. That wasn't how this shit unfolded. And that's proven through history with photos, videos, pogroms, dead bodies. Like, it's fucking proven, man. And, like, the amount of Arabs that are across the Middle East are indicative of the Arab expansion. It goes back to the Arab Empire and how that shit unfolded. Like, it had nothing to do with just, like, people being like, well, we really actually just love Islam. Like, oh, okay, sure. Like, I'm sure some do. Islam is a beautiful religion. I studied it. I've read the Quran. Have you? Like,
there's people reading it now on TikTok.
I can't with the fucking trans girl on TikTok who I just want to smack upside the head, like, for just being obnoxious. But, like,
I want to keep digging into this question of colonization, though, because I'm personally curious about...
Well, like I was going to say, the definition of it is building your holy land on top of another person's holy land, and on top of another group's holy land. Al-Aqsa Mosque, as beautiful as it is, I am not advocating for tearing it down. I am simply stating that it was built directly on top of the Hebrew Temple. Directly. Like, it is in the same spot. And, like, the Iron Dome, or not the Iron Dome, but the Dome of the Rock is directly over the fucking Hebrew Temple. So, like...
And it just so speaks to how this is obviously not the same situation as what we are used to when we talk about colonization and decolonization in America. And I would still advocate for decolonization in the way that I mean it, in a general sense. Like, I'm still a person who would say that decolonization is something that will help. However, there's this weird jump happening that I think is not actually an attempt at decolonization. It is actually just anti-Semitism under the guise of an attempt at decolonization. That's what I'm seeing. And I think part of it is this, like, lack of understanding of the actual context, which is very hard. I'm pretty smart. I've been looking at this stuff. I don't have a comprehensive opinion about all of this right now.
Should you?
There's not been enough time or energy. I don't have a graduate degree in this. And I don't... gosh, and this is such a difficult conversation to even begin to talk about because people are so ready to shut it down no matter what. But this thing about colonization is really, to me, like a big crux of what it does is it allows people to just like use it as a hammer when that's not really what's happening.
Sure.
And
because they've lived for the last 10 years of feeling like every time they throw down the gauntlet on something, it happens. Right? So when you have...
And that's appropriate when it came to American politics, I personally think. But it doesn't transfer.
But even then, it doesn't make you all powerful, all knowing, because you are a single minority demographic. It doesn't. My experience growing up in Vermont, living in Pennsylvania, living in Philadelphia, driving back and forth to places like Lancaster, spending time in these areas in the middle of Pennsylvania, spending summers in Western PA, that does not make me an expert on the queer experience in the United States. Mm-hmm. Existing as a Black person in Maine or in Philly does not make you an expert on the Black experience.
Well, you can just talk about your own experience, which is why it's really wild to me that people are talking suddenly about something that is not their experience.
Right, but my point in bringing that up is that is how we have gotten to where we are, where people are talking on shit that they have no context for understanding. It's not even that they don't understand. They have no context for understanding what's happening.
Yeah.
None.
I agree with that.
None whatsoever. Because the reality that is being grossly missed, and in my opinion at this point, intentionally missed, it was one thing the first couple weeks after October 7th. Until November, even. I'll give them until December. Fuck, because I understand the complexities of what is happening.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'll give them until December. To not realize to this day that Hamas is not a liberation group, that Hamas is not even working for the Palestinian people. They don't give a shit. Like, and for people to still believe that they are a resistance group and to perpetuate that is, to me, it speaks much more to the arrogance of the West, of the left specifically, because of the amount of credence that they have felt, the amount of justification that they have felt from things like Black Lives Matter, from things like the Me Too movement, from things like the other really important, really valid movements that have happened over here, but the amount of accusations that have gone unchecked, the amount of running their mouth that have gone unchecked because of what they've been associated with. Because this whole notion that we have on the left of our voice matters more than the voice of a white man is grotesque. It's gross. And that's why we have Trump. It's why.
Well, it is. And
like,
it makes people, there's a reason there's a phrase of like the silent majority, because when you start to then police what people can say, there's plenty of people that are just going to think something but quietly now.
Yep.
And that is what that proved. And I don't think there's any lessons learned there. Like, unfortunately, I would love to live in a timeline where Trump is not about to win, and I don't think I'm in that timeline. I'm pretty sure I'm in the one where he wins. And
oh boy, is he.
I'm pretty sure. It's because, guess why? Because we didn't learn lessons. We did not grow from the last experience, and we didn't even grow from when we already had signs that the last experience was going to happen in like 2015 or before or whatever. Like, we've seen these things coming, and then it's just becoming more like it's almost like self-sabotaging, or like, I'm going to go back to nihilism, because again, like, the misapplication of this idea of decolonizing is also skipping the whole middle step of decolonizing, which is something I wrote out, again, pursuant to this podcast, which was really fascinating, which is where there is a process of decolonization, and you can't just like get something back to purity. Purity is a colonizing concept, so you're never going to just like strip all the colonizing 100% out of anything. You're gonna maybe move toward that, and part of that is maybe like land back or something. And then there's scholarship about like there can't be a lot of centering of colonizer futures. Okay, so let's take those out of the equation in order to start toward the path of decolonizing, not in order to finish the path of decolonizing, because you know what that's called? Genocide. Mm-hmm. That's what it's called. So if you're going to skip the step in the middle I understand you have to move in a direction with some hope and without a perfect plan. Okay. But you cannot skip the step where you figure out what's happening to the human beings also. And if you're going to not do that and just advocate to cancel half of the equation there and decolonize, quote unquote, the scholarship knows what that is. It's called genocide. Mm-hmm. So that is another problem of just like not really like you are now the fascist. You are now the colonizer, random person on the left who thinks they're running their mouth and has something to say about this and is being like deeply anti-Semitic. I also had people
deeply fucked up.
Yeah.
Deeply
fucked up. And not understanding, I think, the history of the Jewish people either, because
nobody understands the history of the Jewish people because nobody fucking teaches it. Like, and
it's just like lost in a generation or something.
I was talking to you about this earlier. Like in college, like I learned from a very pro-Arab man. Like I love him. Like he was a great professor and he taught me a lot and I have the utmost respect for him. But like he left out 99% of the Jewish experience in that history lesson, quote unquote. Like the Jewish experience was not included in that history because it was just the Jewish experience and whatever, you know? It's fine. They lived. Somewhat. Might be a little depleted, but they're still there. Like, okay. Like, the only Jewish history we get is the Holocaust, and that is, like, begrudgingly. Because there were so many.
Well, that took legal action, right? Which is really the heart of all of this kind of politics. Like,
it's like the most egregious part for me. Like, I'm just like, we had to fucking petition. Like, are you serious?
That's how it works, though. Like, we don't want to have to operate in the law, but that's exactly what intersectionality is about. That's exactly what all of this, like, that's what all of this talk is about, is how to actually do that, and it's through law.
Yeah.
That's how the world works.
Yeah.